Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I'm here with a few special guests. We have back Jim Bevan. Welcome back, Jim.
You're a meshy.
And we actually have this person on a various episodes of Nickelodeon Slimecast podcast and Nick Smissel, but this is the first time he's actually been in an episode of Casual Chat. So we have opera reviewer, concert reviewer, movie, TV, anime reviewer, actor, everything but the kitchen sink. We have Antoni Garcia. So welcome, Antoni.
Hello there, everybody. How have you been?
We've been doing good, thank you. So, today we are going to be discussing about the anime Yu Yu Hakusho in honor of its 25th anniversary. On December 3rd, 1990 was when the original manga came out, created by Yoshihiro Togashi. But the anime adaptation came out on October 10th, 1992. I know, I'm late. This has been a long month. It's actually a perfect timing that we are actually discussing about Yu Yu Hakusho, because a few months ago, that long-haired creepy guy, Igonyama70 and I, we discussed about Sailor Moon. And funny thing is that both of these creators are husband and wife. So, hey, it's our little bit of talking about two iconic anime and in the same year, so perfect. So, right before we discuss about Yu Yu Hakusho, so, Antoni, how did you first get introduced to this show?
Well, I was a very young boy living in the Philippines, and I was about 6 or 7 years old, and it came out with a title of Ghost Fighter, and the names of Yusuke, Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei had anglicized names like that of Eugene, Alfred, Dennis, and Vincent, even though it was in Tagalog, a language that I kind of knew and understood, but I was kind of lazy to speak it. It wasn't until that I re-encountered that said anime about 13 years ago, and I managed to really have such a really strong following with this particular anime, because let's just say that Yu Yu Hakusho was this one anime that I knew was going to be very interesting, because I was a major fan of the fighting anime genre. I was totally in love of characters just really duking it out, whether it be in an arena or whether it be all of these battles. So I knew that Yu Yu Hakusho was going to spark something really awesome in me. So that's how I managed to have my first experiences with Yu Yu Hakusho as a 6 or 7 year old boy who lived in the Philippines for quite some time. And I also caught a few clips of the English dub, and I also had to say that it's definitely one of Funimation's finest efforts, especially when you have Justin Cook, Christopher Sabat, John Bergmeyer and Chuck Huber as the four main heroes. So that's basically my experience with Yu Yu Hakusho.
Yeah. How about you, Jim?
I got introduced to Yu Yu Hakusho when it first came on Adult Swim back in 2002. You know, I really enjoyed. You know, I was a big fan of the action shows that Cartoon Network had on at the time. I saw the previews for it, and it definitely looked like something interesting. I was never the biggest anime fan, but just something about the art style and the premise interested me. So I chose to check it out, and it quickly became one of my favorites. And I tried to watch every episode when I could. I even watched the episodes that reran on Toonami, even though they were pretty badly edited to be more appropriate for the younger kids. So those led to some amusing moments. But I definitely gotta say, it's still better in its uncut form.
Yeah. I think I was introduced to Yu Yu Hakusho around the Adult Swim era. This was like, the anime that was not going to be shown on Toonami. The more adult or more, more violent anime. So I remember, like, around the early 2000s, this was when people started getting more introduced to anime. I mean, we already had with the mid to late 90s with the likes of Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, but this was around the time in which my anime phase was growing. I think I've already mentioned this multiple times before that when I was reaching my teenage years, I stopped pretty much watching Nickelodeon, and then I geared more to watching Toonami and Adult Swim because I felt like, those shows would be more catered to my audience. And so that's when I started watching a lot more anime, and Yu Yu Hakusho was one of them. And around that time, they were showing the reruns of Dragon Ball Z, they were showing Inuyasha, they were showing Yu Yu Hakusho, they were showing Cowboy Bebop, and a whole bunch of shows that, pretty much came and went. So, I guess we can get things started. So, for those who don't know, Yu Yu Hakusho involves with a 14-year-old boy named Yusuke, and he gets hit by a car just because he wants to save a kid's life. And immediately, when wandering around into the spirit world, he meets up with his companions, and then they become spirit world detectives, and they basically just go around and they, solve crimes, or they do various tasks so they can be able to keep things, afloat between, like, the real world and the spirit world.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that there's a lot, similar to, like, any anime ever, there's always a division between, like, various arcs. The first arc is known as the spiritual detective arc. That's when we start learning a little bit more about the characters and about the spirit world. So, yeah.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts on the first season, or the first arc, or whatever?
I think the way I see the first season is that it establishes Yusuke really well. I mean, Yusuke is not like any other anime protagonist. I mean, comparing Yusuke to the likes of Goku is like really finding out that Yusuke is not really that much of a goody two-shoes, unlike Goku in the Dragon Ball series. Now, Goku is very much a goody two-shoes, but Yusuke, he is far from being a goody two-shoes.
Yeah, I definitely do agree, because, I mean, this is like one of the examples of, like, he's basically an anti-hero, which, I mean, Goku, I mean, not to bring up what everybody has already brought up, so I apologize. So yeah, Goku is like the anime equivalent of Superman, which I know that Toriyama wasn't intending for that to happen. That was all the anime's. The anime wanted it to be like a case in which, like, Goku could be like the everyman who becomes a superhero and saves the world and saves people and has close friends. You were seeing a different perspective of Goku in Dragon Ball Super, which that was what Toriyama intended. But yeah, I mean, anyway, but I mean, people can. People have complained about that, but maybe in the future I'll do a Dragon Ball podcast. But yeah, definitely I would say Yusuke is a lot more darker. He's definitely a lot more serious in his personality. He is trying to infatuate the fact that he's dead and that, he's brought up to be a detective. I mean, he was like he was kind of like a bully character who didn't pretty much care about nobody. But then when he saw that kid about to be hit by a car. Then he's like, I'm going to save this kid. But then it turned out that ended up with, him losing his life. And now he's trying to figure out how to live off this new one with all these weird people.
Exactly.
He's one of the more human anime protagonists, I think.
Yeah.
They don't try to make him out to be this paragon of virtue or this chosen, destined hero. He's just some guy who, he's looking out for himself, but when the time comes, he will do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that's become more common nowadays with our anti-heroes, in which they're just guys who are just trying to live off their life and bad stuff happens to them, but they're not, like, super likable. I think that with the likes of various characters from, like, Mad Men and Breaking Bad, Walking Dead, and the Game of Thrones, I think we're seeing a lot more of that than what compared to, like, over 25 or 30 years ago in TV, in which the protagonist is always the good guy. They have a strong virtue, especially with anime.
Exactly.
Anime is really, really guilty when it comes to, like, overly, fighting for justice protagonists.
Exactly. And probably I would like to say that Yusuke also came before the likes of Inuyasha and Ichigo from, of course, Inuyasha and Bleach respectively. He's basically sort of like the founding father of all of these bad boy main heroes, the ones who are kind of really not ideally good on the outside, but they have their own sense of codes on the inside. And they don't always want something like the greater good or something like that. But you kind of do get a feeling that that's what sort of makes them human, because... And that's what also makes them rather interesting as characters, because for someone like me, I actually gear more towards the likes of Yusuke and to some extent Inuyasha and maybe Ichigo, and of course Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop and Ichisa from Technolize, rather than I would gear towards Goku, because I think these guys have a lot more depth and they actually go through a lot, and they're extremely interesting characters.
Agreed.
Yeah, and even the other characters that Yusei meets up with, they don't start off with, like, really nice people. I mean, when we meet up with Kuwabara for the first time, they have this really strong rivalry with one another right before they start becoming friends.
Exactly.
And especially with Hiei.
Hiei was so nasty back then. He started off as a complete villain, but after he lost that fight with Yusuke, he kind of reluctantly joined their team.
And now for a lot of people, he's the fan favorite.
Exactly. I think it's because of the main reason that he is the Lancer of the group. He's the one with all of the snide and really dark comments. He's usually the one with all of these snide comments that he makes towards the competitors, and on top of that, he's also quite lethal in terms of his fighting skills.
Yeah.
He's actually a pretty prodigious fighter when one thinks about it. He also does have this friendship/rivalry with Yusuke, which I'm also a major fan of, because as much as I'm a big fan of friendship/rivalry between Kuwabara and Yusuke, I have to say that the relationship that he and Yusuke have, both as friends and rivals, is actually very interesting. We're not just talking about all these three first, but also Kurama. He basically is like the defunct straight man of the group.
Yeah, you cannot resist the Bishonen.
No, you definitely cannot.
And you can't.
And that's another thing I love. I love the band. You were talking about how you like the interplay between Hiei and Yusuke. You also gotta love the interplay that Hiei and Kurama have. When they will just sit back and offer their banter. Kurama being more, straight-laced and serious, and Hiei just being the deadpan snarker.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the first case in the first season is to retrieve the 3 treasures from the underground, and they have to get it from the demons, Hiei, which we already mentioned before, Kurama, and Goki. So while collecting the treasures, they start meeting up with these various characters, and of course they start joining up in the group along the way. And yeah, they basically, throughout the season, we learn a lot about the treasures, and we learn more about the underground world, and it's definitely a good, first season in which everything is described. I think that the second season, which when they go into the Dark Tournament arc, is where a lot of people got a lot more invested in it, because, hey, it's a tournament.
Exactly, and I think that's the sort of fad during shonen anime at the time, and it's still pretty much a trend today. The tournament saga, those huge tournaments in which characters get into bouts with each other, those pretty much draw in a huge crowd of audiences to basically watch the show. Yes, at times it can be gimmicky, but in Yu Yu Hakusho's favor, it kind of works.
Yeah, it definitely does work, because
the characters involved in there are extremely interesting. And on top of that, now, comparing the tournament saga to that of Dragon Ball Z, in my opinion, it's mostly based on muscle and might. But with Yu Yu Hakusho, yes, there's also strength involved, but there's also finesse and, of course, a lot of strategy.
And variety too. It's not just it's not just muscle-bound characters. You'll have different teams. You'll have a team where their powers are derived from, folklore and fairy tales, or you'll have a team that's based on
Urashimataro. I love him.
Yeah, or you'll have a team that's based on Sentai. And I really gotta say, I have never really cared much for tournament arcs. I think they tend to drag on too much and take away, but Yu Yu Hakusho is the only series I think did a tournament arc well because of the variety of the interesting characters and because of how well it was paced.
Yeah, and also it goes into a direction that you would never think that it would go when they think that Kuwabara was dead.
Oh yeah, that was a shocker.
Yeah, and then of course, I remember when that was revealed. It's like, oh man, it's like one of the main characters that we got to know is actually dead. But then it turns out that no, Kuwabara is alive, but Sakio decided to commit suicide by detonating the stadium, and everybody had to run and escape through the stadium because there was a huge threat that was happening, and
exactly.
It just you never expected that to happen. It's like, a major threat happening to the tournament, and, people's lives are being lost in this.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you never see that in, sure, maybe for, a villain in, Dragon Ball Z, but, nothing, into this extent.
Right. Did you also know that Sakyo was also the love interest of Kuwabara's older sister? Kind of interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, which is I think it kind of makes the death a little bit more tragic.
Yeah, and speaking of older role models, on top of that, Yusuke's mom, she could also pass as his hot older sister because she gave birth to him when she was a teen.
Yeah, that is true. But then again, it's anime. For some reason, anime always depicts their, some of their women characters a lot younger than they appear to be.
Yeah.
But with her being a young mom, that definitely makes a little bit of sense.
Exactly. Given Yusuke's really rough background and, his mom's drinking and smoking habits. Heck, in the manga, Yusuke also drinks and smokes, if you guys are also aware of that.
Yeah, I think that was in the manga, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I forgot about that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, and we've already had the Naruto podcast, and we've briefly talked about Shippuden. But in Shippuden, when Azuma dies, Shikamaru starts smoking cigarettes to avenge Azuma's death. Yeah, and Shikamaru, at this point in time, he must have been like, I don't know, like 15 or 16 years old. But the fact that Yusuke was doing it a lot younger in his age is actually pretty disturbing. And, you know,
Exactly.
So I guess I could understand why anime, especially in the early 90s anime, they had to censor that for obvious reasons.
Exactly. But it's not like the 14-year-olds of today's anime where they look so much younger and they wouldn't be caught dead doing all of these. Heck, you see 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds in anime who look like they're, like, what, 14 or 13 or even 11? And you really wouldn't see them do all these things, you know? Probably because of the whole moe factor, which I'm not a huge fan of.
Neither am I. It's a trend that I think really needs to... The moe trend is something that really needs to be reined in and cut back on.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't get... I get it for, like... I get it's a style or a preference, but yeah, it's... I think it's getting a little bit overboard, you know? Like with Moe-tan or something.
Extremely overhyped. It's kind of something that I'm not always a fan of, because with certain new releases, you constantly see a cutesy character, but when you compare some of those cutesy teens to the teens of Yu Yu Hakusho, you kind of realize, man, that's a lot different. I mean, how old are some of these characters in Yu Yu Hakusho supposed to be? Between the ages of like 14 and 17, and you wouldn't see any of the 14-year-olds, 17-year-olds in anime doing these type of things these days.
Yeah, exactly. It gets pretty ridiculous at points. I do agree. Anyway, so and you know, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be pointing out that there is a character in Yu Yu Hakusho that looks like a baby, but he's not.
Right.
Exactly. Oh, Koenma.
Yeah, Koenma, yes.
He also does transmorph into his young adult form. He has his typical baby form, but every time he transmorphs, he turns into this handsome and sleek and slim young adult.
Yet he still keeps the pacifier for some reason.
Yeah, I know. He keeps the pacifier for some reason, exactly.
Jeez.
No, we've had various characters who are ancient, you know, like hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they look really young. We've talked about that with Chibiusa and Sailor Moon, in which she's 900 years old, but she still has the appearance of a child because she stopped growing. So I guess the same thing could be said about Koenma, even though that he technically is the son of a spirit realm ruler, but he mostly appears as a toddler. Or even with Danny Phantom with Clockwork, in which he switches between a kid, a young adult, and an old man at will. So I guess it's a personal preference.
And even that of Inuyasha.
Yes, exactly. Inuyasha is a great example.
He's supposed to look like he's like about 17 years old, but in reality he's like, I don't know, hundreds of years old. The same thing about his older brother Sashomaru. He stated that he's supposed to look like he's 19, but he's like thousands of years older.
Yeah. I know some takes on the Arthurian legend that do that with Merlin, because he's experienced his time in reverse, so when he's thousands of years old, some authors have him depicted as a teenager or a young child.
Right, absolutely. Right. Looks like we have our guest coming in, so let's bring this guest into the call.
Looks like it's Zenith.
Hello, Zenith.
Hi, Zenith.
Hey, Zenith.
Hello.
Hey, Zenith. Welcome to the podcast. So why don't you give your earliest memories of Yu Yu Hakusho?
Yes, please.
My earliest memories of Yu Yu Hakusho, wow. So this is actually kind of quite a story, because Yu Yu Hakusho was the first anime that I ever saw on Adult Swim. I was staying home, like, my parents were out late at night, so I was able to stay up late without a babysitter, and I was, flipping through channels, and I paused on Adult Swim, and there was a show about someone who ended up getting killed in a car crash and becoming a ghost, and I saw one episode of this, and I fell in love with the entire show only to find that I wasn't able to stay that late again the next day, so I couldn't actually catch the rest of the show for a little while. And oh my god, like I was so upset because I wanted to see more, and thankfully it came to Toonami a couple years later, but that was my introduction to what anime was.
Oh really? Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite shows of all time.
It's a good gateway.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we were just briefly talking about the first 2 seasons and the various characters introduced. So yeah, what are your thoughts on both of these sagas?
What I like about the first season in general is that it really builds up to what it eventually becomes. In fact, in the manga, there's a lot that's actually been removed. If you read the early stages of the manga, it's all about how he deals with the fact that he's dead. And originally it was going to be about him just being a ghost and enjoying stuff in helping other ghosts and stuff like that. And they changed the direction of the manga. I think it was like 5 chapters in, or like 1 volume in. But I like how they really built up to what it eventually become. My favorite parts, one of my favorite parts is the Dark Tournament. I think the Dark Tournament is something that everyone can really remember, but a lot of people forget that the arc that came before it, when he actually infiltrates Toguro's like base of operations, that's where I really feel it started to click as a show, because that's when they like started getting new powers. He started getting more confident. But my favorite saga in general is Chapter Black, because Sensui is my favorite villain.
Mine too.
Yes, it's complex. It builds up to this point, but like you wouldn't really get this from the humble beginnings. But I think it was so interesting from just the way it started out of just a kid who died in a car crash just for saving someone's life, but he was a delinquent kid, and no one would expect this. No one would expect someone like him to help other people. And people like Yusuke are like some of my favorite characters in anime, who are delinquents, who are people who just simply, they don't expect anything of them, like Yusuke and Onizuka and people like that, and they end up doing great things. I think this show is a good example of that.
Yeah, so while we're on the subject, I guess we can talk about the Black Saga.
Yes.
I have to say that it's one of my most favorites as well, because I'm also a huge fan of Sensui as a villain. I think he's actually one of the most complex villains of Yu Yu Hakusho ever. And I have to say that my biggest highlight out of that saga is the fight scene between Yusuke and Hiei in episode 81, where after Sniper gets subdued by Hiei, Hiei basically tells Yusuke that the gates of the underworld have been reopened, and Yusuke is just so conflicted of his duties now as a spirit detective and someone who constantly has to save the world all the time. And of course you get the feeling that yes, Yusuke, even though he's still a teenager, he has this pretty big burden on him, and he's been doing it for quite some time, so even though he feels that obliged, he feels like it's going to cost him a lot more pain. And then when Yusuke says, "See, I have to save the world again," he then proceeds to run after him, and he threatens to slit his throat with his sword, and probably to stop him from doing something rather foolish. And when Yusuke said that Kuwabara needed him the most, he basically stated that Kuwabara wasn't really prepared for this, and this really pisses off Yusuke, and the two, basically start duking it out with each other, especially with Hiei taking off his upper garment, and we see a fight scene in which both Yusuke and Hiei, both shirtless, are punching and kicking each other with their high levels of spirit energy, and it's just really well choreographed. I also have to give loads of props to both Justin Cook and Chuck Huber for really playing off of each other so well. I mean, you could feel the chemistry that these guys have as, let's just say, frenemies. And of course, the fight scene really worked so well. Even after the fight scene, but it's also really brilliant scene. So that's what I say about it. But overall, the chapter is really, really great. The saga is really great.
One of my favorite aspects from the Black Saga, and this is kind of odd, but it shows the kind of person I am. I love the mental battles with Yu Kaito. You remember when he would challenge people to his game of Taboo?
Yeah, yes. I remember.
And if they would have to abide by his rules, or else they'd lose his soul. And it was just so impressive how he would trick people. Like, he would set up the rule, you cannot say the word hot, or you cannot say those letters together. But then Kuwabara gets tricked because he says each other, and because HOT were in sequence, he loses.
Yikes.
Yeah, so I just like that. He's definitely one of the more cerebral characters, and I've always been a fan of, characters like that, protagonists or antagonists. And you also have to give credit to the localization team there, because when it comes to Japanese dialogue, trying to translate puns and wordplay is always an intense challenge. So
exactly.
Oh, it's always so hard.
So I give him credit to that, and it's just so amusing when Kurama manages to get the upper hand on him, as they're as in their game they gradually have less and less letters of the alphabet they can say. But then Kurama just sneaks up and just makes him laugh, and he ends up losing because the last include letters that were banned. And that was also nice. It was good to see the more serious, straight-laced Kurama just actually acting like a goofball.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Really.
Yeah, and also I think that it plays a lot more strategic. It felt like more of a thinking game, as opposed to in the tournament, in which there was a lot of strategy in there, but also, it's your typical tournament arc. But yeah, it felt like there was a bigger stake. There was like more at stake.
Right, and that's a good thing too. There's variety in how the conflict progresses and escalates. You're not just getting repeats of how everything goes.
I also think what Chapter Black added to the table was twofold. First, things were actually a lot darker and more serious. I mean, it's called Chapter Black, but
because of the contraband tape as well.
Yeah. Right? But also just because you had several of the things had major consequences, like the whole thing with Gamer. He ended up dying because, he got roped in and there was nothing anyone could do to save him. Right. The game was rigged against them, so they would have to kill him. And that was the entire point. I mean, yeah, he did kind of ended up living in the end, wasn't it? Like at the very, very last second. But it was, the way they set up the game was for him to lose. And when they realized, we're going to have to kill a little kid to move forward, what are we going to do? And then there was the whole battle, like the way that Kurama ended, I think it's Elder Toguro.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't kill him, but he made him fight an unending battle forever for the rest of his life. Like that is pretty damn cold.
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine. It's like, it's something. It kind of sounds something like a Greek tragedy in which you don't die, but at the same time you're being tortured for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. They took Chapter Black in various different directions that I don't think they could do with the rest of the series, because up until this point, they might not have had the viewership, or maybe he realized Chapter Black was probably going to be his last saga or something like that. I mean, granted, it isn't, but I think they really pulled out a lot of the stops here, and I think since Sensui in general is one of the best villains in the series because of how complex Sensui is. The fact that they use dissociative identity disorder to describe different personalities that he has, and the various attack powers they have was fantastic.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Especially you got to give credit because usually when they do dissociative identity in an antagonist character, that's another thing that can go horribly wrong in its depiction. But here, I would say they didn't make it seem too cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also it has been very well known that Togashi had gotten sick when doing Yu Yu Hakusho and had been going through health problems when working on the manga. And
I never realized that.
Yeah.
I never realized that happened to him.
Yeah, he went through a lot of stress, and he was becoming really sick when he was working on it. And I think even still to this day, he still has health problems, which is why new chapters of Hunter x Hunter have been delayed for a long time.
Yeah, I heard that too. There were times when he's like unable to get out of bed for days.
And I feel really bad because, you know, I know a lot, and there's a lot of stupid, ignorant people out there who are saying, like, you know, where's the newest chapter? Where is it? It's like, you know, aren't you a manga artist? Aren't you supposed to, crank out chapters every single week? It's like, give the guy a rest.
Exactly. I mean, artists are basically like you and me. We're just people living through our passions. And there are days in which we artists will get sick, just like you and me. Not necessarily because we don't take care of ourselves, but because our own bodies, like, there's a certain function that we also need to accept in order for us to say, okay, maybe it's a bit too much, so cut it for a while.
Yeah, I know. You reminded me of something that happened a while ago about people who are, like, insensitive creators. Last year when Doug Walker's mother passed away, there was he was taking a little break from his video production so he could mourn, and someone actually said, I feel sorry, I'm sorry for your loss, but hopefully you don't take too long. Most businesses give you 3 days, 3 days off for grieving before you have to return to work. You should be able to swing that.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
I know,
really?
Unbelievable.
Really. That's rather
everybody mourns differently, but even still, like the entitlement of some things, like. I think, unfortunately, because of the weekly schedules of most things these days, that people forget how hard it is to create, even at the best of times. And, I mean, I know I've taken my breaks because of personal things going on. It's just like you have to understand that we are people, we're human. And when we're grieving or when things happen, there's sometimes that we just can't produce. Like
exactly.
This entire year I've had a bad writer's block to the point where I haven't been able to put out anything major. So I had to change up some things and produce more unscripted videos. It's no fault of my own. It just happens, and you kind of have to go with it. But even then, like I had 3 months where I just took off because I needed time off.
Last summer, I had to do 3 podcasts every single week. And also, my dad is sick. My dad has been sick for a very long time, and he's been going in and out of hospitals. And then there's some people who are saying, like, I want to see you do less podcasts and more videos. It's like, I'm trying my very best to, keep up on a weekly basis, but it hasn't been easy.
Right.
Exactly.
It's like the people who ask me when the next History of One Piece is. It's like I keep explaining, Toei keeps shutting everything down. There's not much I can do about it, but people will keep bringing that up, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. And you do think that, our struggling is bad. I mean, there's been a lot of talks about various manga artists and even animators from Japan who are, working for, like, hours at a time, being paid, like, low wages just so they can be able to get things done.
Exactly.
And then when the animation comes back really badly, people just constantly complain about, oh, this looks absolutely terrible. It's difficult.
Hideaki Anno is a very tragic case, especially when it's reflected on his most famous work of all time, Neon Genesis Evangelion. I mean, you can't really deny the fact that the guy has went through a lot of depression and a lot of emotional turmoil just to get certain episodes done, and especially when it came to the fan outcry, and it's just a lot of crazy shit that happened between the fans and him, and it's like, man.
Right.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah. So if there's anything you listeners take away from this, be more understanding when it comes to creators. They are human. They have setbacks. They have losses, and they need time.
Yeah, exactly.
And more so than I think even in America, they have this thing in Japan where they're supposed to be working more than anyone else. There's this thing where people work themselves to death over there.
Yeah.
And it's pretty common, unfortunately.
Yeah, I heard about that. They call it karoshi, I think.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been, and you see like businessmen going through it. Like they would be working like 20 hours every single day, and then they would just come back pretty exhausted. It's just a sad thing.
It's
Anyway,
terrible.
I know that we're going way off topic, and I apologize for that, but I think that this is very important, especially when talking about Yu Yu Hakusho, because, this happened around the time that, Togashi was working on the Dark Tournament arc, and, he would stay up for hours at a time working and drawing characters, and then it pretty much affected him for the rest of his life. Even still to this day, he still has health problems from all the work that he did doing Yu Yu Hakusho.
Oh, shit.
It seems like Yu Yu Hakusho was a very big passion project for him. And you could see in later arcs how it started to fail a little bit when either the manga was canceled or whatever happened with that, because after Chapter Black it started going a little bit downhill. That could have been his health or whatnot. But
most likely it could have been due to his health, because this is when his health really took a major toll. So yeah, let's talk about the last arc. So yeah, let's talk about the Three Kings saga. And this was this was the last one in the anime, and definitely not as like extremely intense or as up to grander in scale compared to the Dark Tournament saga or even the likes of the Black arc.
Exactly. My personal opinion about that saga, I kind of have mixed feelings about it. I can understand that, the show was almost about to end at the time, and as for the Three Kings saga, I have to say that it's relatively good. It's nowhere near as great as the Black Tournament, nor even the Chapter Black saga, but I still have to give it credit for at least trying to wrap things up and ending things on a pretty satisfying note.
Sure, yeah, I do think that the last episode does end in a very satisfying way.
Exactly. I mean, I cannot say the same thing for the likes of like Bleach, which seems to go on for quite a long time, and especially for like Naruto and Naruto Shippuden, and even of course Dragon Ball Z and even Dragon Ball. I mean, such shows like that. Oh, and let's not forget about what happened with Inuyasha. After 167 episodes, then came the final act after 5 years.
Yeah.
And then it was a bit rushed and ended everything with 26 episodes.
Yeah, it's at least they knew when to end it. Whether it be to Togashi's health or whether that, they wanted the story to be to go that way. At least they were able to end it with a decent amount of episodes, like over 100 episodes, as opposed to like dragging it on until it reached so many episodes that you can't even keep up with.
Exactly. That's why I kind of gave up on Detective Conan. Well, I still like the show, but come on, it's been going on for many years. Yeah. And there's a big part of me that's actually kind of a bit trepidated with reviewing Bleach, because even though I kind of like Bleach, it's a pretty impossible anime for me to review because it's so freaking long, and I cannot keep up with the ginormous cast of characters. I don't even know who the main character is in that anime anymore. I mean, of course, you got Ichigo and Rukia, but you got other characters like Soifan and Yuriichi, Chiruchi, Apollo, and oh my god, it gets so annoyingly bloated.
Yeah, but at least they knew when to end it. Anyway, so going into the Three Kings saga. So with this one, I feel that I mean, it started off pretty interesting, but then it kind of just meandered a little bit, and I don't know, just something about it just didn't really click for me compared to the other sagas.
Exactly.
I mean, I knew what they were going for. I definitely did feel like, you know, like all the pieces coming in together, but I mean, it just felt like it wasn't as captivating as compared to the other stories, but I can see that they were really trying to, you know, have it like this big final mission, and then it was going to conclude in a very satisfying way. I saw you know, I saw what they were going for. I just think that the execution could have been a little bit better.
Exactly.
I think there's a lot of elements that are in the right place, and there are a lot of things that, you know, are there. You can tell that, you know, there's not as much complexity as before, but you can tell that they're trying to be there, and there's a lot of stuff that we aren't really told, and I think a lot of it is to do with how rushed it seems.
Exactly.
If they had given it maybe like another 20 episodes, I think it would be able to really flesh out a lot of the characters of the three kings, because we don't get a lot of two of them, and it feels like there is a story there with the blind one and his son,
Yomi and Shura.
Yeah, Yomi and Shura, and I'm very bad with the last arc names. The one especially that Hiei goes to.
Yeah, Mukuro.
Yeah,
right?
Mukuro. Yeah, like there's a lot of story that seems to be there that we aren't really being told a lot of backstory, and I can get a feeling like there's something
let's
there.
Not forget about Yusuke's yokai or demon father, Raizen. I mean, he isn't really too much of a fleshed out character, even though his backstory is really, really interesting. But other than that, his backstory could have been more expanded upon, so to say. That would have been great.
I think they could have done a little bit more with him after the backstory. The backstory itself, I thought, was really engaging, but afterwards, like once they start entering the tournament portion, is when it actually starts going downhill with that, where we could have learned more with that, or maybe he could have changed, or but like the idea that he doesn't eat anyone because of a woman he loved, and he's been suffering for years, that's really interesting. It just, after that little bit of opening stuff is where it starts meandering to the point where it's just like, well, is there a resolution to that? No, there's resolution to the overall story, but the individual characters, where we get the most interesting bits, that's where we don't get too much, and you can tell that they ended it before it was really ready.
Yeah, I really love the potential that they had there. I mean, Yusuke having an existential crisis about, you know, realizing that he's half demon.
Exactly.
And the power struggles in the spirit world. That would provide some interesting conflict. You know, let's see how things go behind the scenes. Let's have some in-depth character analysis. But then they just decide, okay, we're wrapping things up with another tournament.
Yeah,
exactly.
I felt like they were rehashing from, you know, the last one. It's like, hey, you know, the tournament did really well with this one, so let's see if we can end it with another one.
My thoughts exactly. I mean, the tournament thing was a bit of a rehash. I mean, we don't need another freaking tournament arc. I mean, I know that tournaments were sort of the fad, like I stated before, in a lot of shonen anime, but come on. One tournament arc is more than enough.
Now, I mean, a lot of people can argue about, oh, what about Dragon Ball Z? Dragon Ball Z had a lot of tournaments. Well,
exactly.
They kind of, I mean, I could kind of argue that, yes, it did have a lot of tournaments, but at least they spaced them out, you know? Yes. It was the first tournament where Goku was fighting off against Tien Shan and, you know, all the other characters and Yamcha, and then eventually King Piccolo. Then we had the other tournament where he met up with Chi-Chi. Then there was, you know, the tournament in which, you know, it would take place, like, after Dragon Ball Z ended, and we saw the fights between, you know, Goten and Trunks and all that stuff. So they had various tournaments, and they were just like one-off things. Some of them didn't even last a whole arc.
Which is part of the problem with Dragon Ball Z too, because like I haven't seen much of Dragon Ball myself, but in Dragon Ball Z, I kind of wish they actually followed through on the tournament, because a lot of the times they would just have like the first round, and then they would go off to a fight. And I'm just like, no, finish the damn tournament.
Exactly.
Although that did lead to Majin and Vegeta. But in terms of this tournament, I think it could have worked if they had given it a little bit more time, since it was only one arc before it. You know, like, we didn't have enough time to really get a status quo, since the chapter Black changed things up, and we didn't need it so soon. But I think what they should have done is, if they were going to go into this other world, and I'm going to praise Bleach here, Bleach actually did that correctly by creating a much more interesting like structure and stuff going on behind the scenes. And while Bleach dropped the ball on that as well, like, here I feel like there was something going to happen, much like the Soul Society, where there is structure here, and that afterwards they would probably go into doing more things in the spirit world like that. And it felt like the entire show was kind of building up to more in the spirit world, like this, like when they introduced S-Class demons and like Double S and stuff like that, where, you know, the human world was actually really weak, and the fact that the stuff that Yusuke was dealing with was actually pretty commonplace. I thought that was interesting, because, like, what happens when he actually gets to stronger things, and it's a lot like in One Piece, where you have these power structures of the world. You have the weak part of the world, and you have the strong part of the world, and you need to build up to that point. And One Piece has done it right, to where it just keeps building and keeps balancing the powers, whereas unfortunately here we didn't get enough time to really do that.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so yeah, you know, I guess, but still, I think that the ending, you know, I think that the ending kind of made it a little worth it.
The ending episode, in and of itself, is fantastic. Like, say what you will about the arc, the way they wrap everything up, I thought was great. I do kind of wish that they had, if they were going to end it, they would have had him keep being a spirit detective, and just, like, you know, say adventures will happen in the future. But that episode in and of itself was great. I really felt they could have done more with Keiko. Like, I like Keiko in the end, but I'm just like, overall, like, she's the love interest, but she's barely there. And
exactly.
It shows, like, where the episode is good, but I'm saying to myself, but Keiko is barely there.
Exactly. And she's not like, let's say, her predecessor Chi-Chi, nor her successor Kagome, in which both of them have kind of been with the hero, especially through thick and thin. But with Chi-Chi's case, she sort of became like, okay, she's basically the nagging wife, wants to make sure that Gohan has a great education. But I think Kagome is slightly better than both Keiko and Chi-Chi can ever be, because, you know, she's also the main heroine. And while I'm not a huge fan of both Inuyasha and Kagome as a couple, I can still give the show credit for how they grow as people, for, like, everything they went through. And of course, Kagome, she kind of grew as an archer, mostly because she was also a descendant of Kikyo. So,
I mean, they actually utilized that character quite well, and I if I were to say one of the huge weaknesses of Yu Yu Hakusho is that Keiko is just used as a damsel of distress for half the show as motivation for Yusuke. And what worked was the Dark Tournament, when he started to go and rescue Kie's brother and then go to the Dark Tournament. This was one of the few times where he didn't have to rescue Keiko. And same thing with Chapter Black, where it was more about something else. And when it moved away from that, it was actually so much better involved in that. And I think the author wanted to have motivation for Yusuke as the main character, and I really feel like it felt like Keiko was supposed to be the love interest. The problem is she was never given the power or the ability, and granted, she's a human in a world full of demons that she can't usually see, but I felt like if you're going to have this relationship, you have to do it in a way that you either give her power to deal with it, or
Exactly.
if you're going to sideline her, at least
Or make her meticulous as well.
Yeah. Or maybe do what Kingdom Hearts did and make it believable why she's on the sidelines. Like, you know, she's incapacitated, but she's with the main character the entire time, sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, bit of a missed opportunity there with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think with Keiko, while she's an okay character, I'm not really a major fan of her because, well, my experience with her is that she seems to be like the chick of the group. Okay, say what you will about Yukina, but okay, she's Hiei's sister, and she's also Kuwabara's love interest. Botan is a lot more active when it comes to the female characters in Yu Yu Hakusho.
Best waifu.
And
I almost kind of almost compare her to Mako from Sailor Moon with her tough attitude.
It's a good comparison.
I think she's one of the more interesting characters in general, Botan.
Absolutely. I love her as a character.
And
also Genkai. I cannot forget about her.
Genkai is fantastic.
And her young version.
Absolutely awesome. Yeah, one of the best mentors in anime, one of the best female characters in anime. I mean, what's not to like about her? She is badass personified.
Absolutely.
And
I mean,
elderly, which you don't really see that much of either. I mean, usually it's the elderly men who are the secret badasses.
Yeah, true. But with Genkai, she kind of broke the mold. I think she can definitely give Master Roshi a run for his money.
Yeah. So overall, I think we can start wrapping things up. So overall, Yu Yu Hakusho starts off in a very strong note and continues to get better. But I guess as time went on, when Togashi started to get sick and his health problems really took over for him, is when things started going downhill. But it does end on a very satisfying note. So I think that overall, despite having a few flaws with the story and with some of the character development, I think it's still a really great show that if you haven't seen it yet, I do think it's highly recommended that you do check it out.
Right. And I'd also like to say something.
Sure.
I mainly talked about the English voice actors like Justin Cook and Christopher Sabat and John Bergmeyer and Chuck Huber. But here's something very interesting about the Japanese voice acting. Did you also know that Hiei was basically Nobuyuki Kiyama's star-making role? And did you also know that the same guy who voiced Yusuke Urameshi, Nozomu Sasaki, also voiced Tetsuo from Akira?
No way. That's actually pretty cool. It's almost like the same character.
Exactly.
That's pretty neat.
And even on top of that, Kurama, well, basically the Shinichi persona, was voiced by a woman, and her name was Megumi Ogata, who's a very well-known female seiyuu, who is also a singer, and she's usually well-known for voicing all of these boyish females and even some of these biphonian characters. And let's not forget, Megumi Hayashibara also voices young Genkai.
Wow, that's pretty interesting there, Antoni.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think what Yu Yu Hakusho brings to the table is it's an interesting story that builds upon itself. It reminds me a little bit of something like Noragami, where it starts off as one thing but becomes something so much better. And I think if you give Yu Yu Hakusho a chance, it won't disappoint. It has some of my favorite characters. It has some of my favorite voice acting. The English cast is amazing, and a lot of the English voice cast was their first roles.
Absolutely.
And they pulled through, and it sounds
was only
Justin Cook
when he voiced Yusuke. He was only 20 years old.
Cool.
And he's now a producer over at Funimation. Like, there's a lot of people who got their start with Yu Yu Hakusho, but it feels
and Aaron
like
Dismuke, he also had his start. A lot of people say it was Alphonse Elric, but he actually had a minor role in Yu Yu Hakusho.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget about Cynthia Kranz, who also voiced, I think, Botan, and Laura Bailey, who voiced Keiko.
Oh, that was Laura Bailey? Cool.
Yeah,
exactly. And this was like when she was doing a lot of anime. Nowadays, she's like a really well-known, prominent voice actress.
Yeah, she's
everything.
She's the go-to woman for Telltale games. I know that.
Yeah, absolutely. She's like Steve Bloom, in which she started off with a lot of anime, and then started becoming voicing in like various video games and cartoons and all that stuff. So yeah, good for her.
Yeah. So you have a star-studded cast. You have a story that's allowed to go into interesting routes, darker routes than we see in a lot of anime. Like a lot of anime. They try to either market towards kids these days, or they try to skirt around certain things. But they went there. They really went there in a lot of these places, and it's better for it.
Yes, absolutely. I think it is better for it, and this definitely. You do see a lot of anime nowadays that does lean more towards like teenagers, but nothing that I've seen so far really goes into like a really interesting world like Yu Yu Hakusho. So
exactly.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people who are interested in checking it out, then yeah, definitely give it a shot. I think that it'll be well worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly hope to review this anime mostly through this Halloween season, because I cannot wait to start reviewing it.
Oh yeah.
I'm starting to have Paranoia Agent in the works, but first I kind of have to prioritize on my review of Verdi's Don Carlos, live from the Opéra Bastille de Paris in France.
All right.
So
yeah, I guess we can start doing our plug and self promotions. So Zenith, what do you got working?
Unfortunately, I had originally been planning a long time ago to do Yu Yu Hakusho for the 10th anniversary of my show on November 10th, but obviously that's going to be shot because I don't have enough time to do that. But right now, what I'm working on, I actually have a few different things. I have Assassination Classroom fully scripted and ready to record. I have Food Wars fully scripted and ready to record, so I'm working on that. Also, I have Danganronpa 1 Trigger Happy Havoc. Like this, it's a massive review. It's 36 pages long, which is the longest script. And if you've seen some of my work, this is like 10 pages longer than Final Fantasy. So that's something I've been working on for a year. But it's scripted, it's ready to record, it's ready to go. So all those three things are in the works, and in addition to all the other projects I do. But so those are ready to go. I'm working on more anime in the future, and my strike goes away on October 27th. So that's when like all the Toei stuff finally ends. Guys, I don't know if I'm going to be doing any more History of One Piece, because even if I do keep trying, Toei shuts it down. So I'm going to keep trying maybe smaller things, but I don't want to rock the boat. I just got, I'm just getting back some like abilities of my channel. I don't want to have to like worry about stuff with Toei right now.
Understood. And what do you got, Jim?
I am working on the next chapter of Power Rangers Helios. I'm hoping to have that up sometime before Friday, because once Super Mario Odyssey drops, that's probably going to be taking up a lot of my free time. And I will also be working on another thing for Manic Expression's 31 Days of Halloween, coming the 30th. It will be my first attempt at a short horror story.
All right. And as for me, I'm planning on working on another video, so stay tuned for that. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been my pleasure to join you.
Thank you for having me.
It was great being back.
All right, so let us know in the comments below about your earliest memories of Yu Yu Hakusho. Were you introduced to the anime? Were you introduced to the manga? What are your favorite characters? What are your favorite moments? What's your favorite arc? That's it, everybody. Hope to see you around soon, and thank you for listening.
See ya.
Bye.
Marking off my leg.